The big breaking news that has hit all over the place in just the last hour or so is that OJ Simpson. It's very interesting to see how people are covering this, given what happened, what he did. OJ Simpson, how are they going to describe this fellow in the headlines? Depends on where you go. He has passed away from cancer. So OJ Simpson is dead. And this is, for a lot of people, bringing back a whole bunch of memories. I remember this, Clay, as the OJ trial was the first time I had ever paid attention to a criminal trial. I think I was in the seventh or eighth grade. I can't even remember now. It was on all the time. It really felt like, in a lot of ways, the beginning of court TV as its own phenomenon, or as a national obsession, because it was the biggest thing for a while. I remember it watching live. I believe it was the Knicks against the Houston Rockets when I used to watch the NBA, because I was a big Knicks fan at the time. And they cut from the game to show the white Bronco, the Ford Bronco chase on the highway. And this brings back a lot of memories for people, and also a reminder of how toxic and evil race politics can be, because this was the first time, certainly in my lifetime, that I can remember somebody getting away with something so incredibly heinous, because essentially they said, the argument that was made was, well, there's a lot of racism in this country, so let's just have this as kind of a makeup call, if you will. And two innocent people, one entirely unrelated to OJ in any context whatsoever, a bystander effectively, brutally murdered. Clay, I know you were on Fox talking about this, and it's going to dominate the headlines, I think, for a portion of today. It feels quite strange to me. I mean, you remember when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi died, and the New York Times described him as a austere religious scholar?
Yes.
I'm seeing a little bit of that, and I know that he just died, and we usually don't want to speak ill of the dead as this thing that we have, but people got upset about the austere religious scholar, also the psychopathic terrorist, murderer, and rapist Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi being described that way. OJ's legacy. When they talk about OJ's legacy, I feel like they've got to lead into what everybody knows here, or else they're part of a rewriting of history.
I believe in forgiveness and redemption. OJ never asked for either. He's a killer, I believe, based on all the evidence. And frankly, I think he should rot in hell. And I don't feel any compunction or necessity to tiptoe up to this. He never accepted responsibility for killing Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman, two innocent people, Buck. He basically cut their heads off. I mean, this was a incredibly violent murder, even by violent murder standards. And then he became, I think, and I tweeted this, the forerunner of identity politics as justification for anything. Because OJ Simpson got off, the jury found him not guilty of murder based on him arguing that America had a racist history and the Los Angeles Police Department had a racist history, and therefore he shouldn't be responsible for what happened, and in fact that they framed him. And the jury bought it, I think, to the eternal discredit of the jury. I think O.J. Simpson traded on true racism that I acknowledge existed in the 1950s and 1960s. Innocent people who were guilty because of their race. O.J. then decided, I'm going to swing that back in the other direction, and I'm going to avoid punishment because of my race. And I think
Well,
it's a forerunner to the modern identity politics culture that we've created today.
Ann Coulter had a line in one of her columns about this, where she referred to the OJ verdict for a while meant that the liberal white guilt bank was closed.
Yeah.
That you could no longer get away with the same kinds of in treaties, arguments based on racial politics and racial positioning, because there was such a revulsion to the verdict. I mean, I don't know what it was like in your school. I remember this very clearly in my school. I was at a Catholic school in New York City, and there were not a lot of minority students, black students in the school, but there were some, and a few of them, we all listened on the only time anything like this happened when I was in grammar school. We all listened on the radio. I didn't even we had a radio in the classroom as the verdict was, read aloud. And a few of the black students jumped up and down, cheered, ran around the building, and screamed "in your face" to everybody. And I remember the school administrators didn't. Everybody was just so shocked. By the way, there was no punishment for this. I mean, they just kind of were just they just did this, and I guess it was considered acceptable. It was such a toxic moment of race politics in this country. It was
Yeah.
so grotesque that there was finally, I think, a national reckoning from all people of all ethnicities who act in good faith and believe in the justice system that this kind of thing cannot be allowed, or cannot be celebrated, cannot be allowed. I remember you mentioned this. You read the People versus O.J.
It's a
Simpson.
fabulous book. And if you are
Was it a
today,
Cuban?
Jeffrey Toobin, he's actually a really talented writer. May
Yeah.
not be able to avoid masturbating in front of female employees while working at the New Yorker, I believe it was. But he is a really talented writer, and it's a great book. And if you want to go into the specific details of that case, I know they turned it into a television show, which you watched.
So you and I can trade on this one because I saw the show. I didn't read that book. I didn't even know there was a book written by Jeffrey Toobin on this. The show was on FX. Cuba Gooding Jr. plays OJ. I thought the show was fantastic.
Did the
I
show,
did.
let me ask you this. The book, Toobin is quite confident that OJ is guilty,
Oh,
and he lays
absolutely.
it out like I don't know, the television show made that clear as well for
Yeah.
people who were watching.
One of the terrible things is that it was so early in DNA analysis that they were able to sort of poke more holes in DNA analysis just because it was a new tech. People forget this. It was new
Yeah,
technology.
right.
Now it would be even. It was an open and shut case then. I mean, now it would be a complete absurdity because of the advances in the technology they have for all this. But I remember this. This was because I followed the trial. I was a young kid. I followed the trial, and I remember parts of it. I told you what it was like when the verdict. I remember feeling like it was a gut punch because in my little 13-year-old mind, I was like, we're still America and we don't want innocent people being killed. No matter how imperfect this country is, we all agree. And in that moment, it wasn't true. In that moment, there was, from some people, there was so much animosity toward whatever they perceive as the injustice of the system or the other that they celebrated the massacre of two innocent people. And we all knew what happened. No one really believed that this was planted. He was looking for the real killers. Clay, he wrote a book. He was going to
If
publish a
I did
book.
it.
If I did it, here's how I did it. What innocent person in the history of the universe would do such a
Yeah,
thing?
I
Obviously, we
agree.
know, it's not, there should be no argument about it. I mean, if we found out the jury was rigged, would we all sit around and talk about how, oh, he's innocent? But there's a scene in the People versus OJ Simpson that I thought was the most powerful scene of the whole thing. And tell me if this is in the book, when Marsha Clark sits down with Ron Goldman's dad. And it is you like well up with tears because he's like, everyone's talking about OJ and his ex-wife and the celebrity affair. He's like, my son is an innocent guy, didn't do anything,
Yeah,
and this lunatic tried to chop his head off.
yeah.
And you're telling me we may not be able to get he breaks down the whole thing. Ron Goldman was just, I mean, this guy obviously murdered his wife and mother of his children and the whole thing, but Ron Goldman was just a guy standing there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's brutal. And to your point, and I'll mention this, we talked about it because we were discussing the Princess Di death because that event, obviously, I said, look, 1986 Challenger explosion, the 1995 OJ verdict. If you're around my age, I just turned 45. 1997 Princess Di, and then 9/11. That 15-year window, those are things that I remember where I was. In my high school, everybody had it on television. And even in your school
So,
where you
so you
said you
watched
guys,
the OJ verdict
oh, I
live on
watched the
TV?
verdict live in high school. I don't remember what, I
Do you
guess I
remember
would have
what the
been like,
reaction was? Like, was
yeah,
everyone just
there were lots of people who were stunned. There were some, I mean, I went to a, mixed race, largely diverse school, Martin Luther King. There were lots of black kids celebrating,
yeah,
like in the high school, the fact that OJ had gotten off because it had turned into a referendum on blackness in some way. OJ, which is
right.
what they spend a lot of time on. OJ used to say all the time, I'm not black, I'm OJ. OJ turned his back to a large extent on the black community to become a huge celebrity. And then the wild thing about it is, as soon as he got in trouble, now obviously Johnny Cochran comes in and look, the prosecutors did not do a good job. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, I think, did a poor job. The judge, was it you? If I remember correctly, the Asian judge who was in
Yeah.
charge of the case, I think did a poor job. And look, the way I thought about it then, and I still think about it now, is beyond a reasonable doubt is a high standard. So everybody has a different percentage of what beyond a reasonable doubt means. To me, it's always been like 98, 99%. You're certain. You can't remove all doubt from any case. But to me, based on reading all the evidence and studying this and even paying attention to it as a lawyer as I got older, there is no doubt that OJ Simpson committed double murder, got away with it, and never accepted
Well,
any responsibility at all for what
and
he had done.
that part of it is terrible enough. He did lose a civil judgment for the murders, and I would just note in the press they all refer to Trump as a rapist because of the, and it wasn't even rape that he was found
It
guilty
was
of, like a
sexual
sexual
assault. Yeah.
assault against E. Jean Carroll. But just to be clear, look at the games they play. They'll say, "Oh, we don't want to call him a murderer because, well, he was found in a civil trial to be a murderer," and Donald Trump, they call him, a sexual abuser, a rapist, and that was just based on a civil trial. No one even charged him criminally because they couldn't, because the whole thing is
Yeah, right.
absurd against Trump, as we know. But the notion that anyone, and there was, and it's interesting that you had that same experience, that people would celebrate the not guilty verdict of a person who did what he did. That was a real moment. It was a real moment of recognition of the country. It was a reminder of how toxic, corrosive, and evil race politics are, and looking at race as like this collective where we have to have the way to imbalance previous injustices is to do injustice today. The
Yeah.
whole thing was absolutely appalling, and the people that were making excuses for OJ and that went along with it, the ones with a high enough IQ, they certainly had to know that what they were doing was grotesque, and it was. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I think that was. It's interesting because you remember where you were in Princess Di died, and I don't. I remember the OJ verdict very clearly.
And you
And
remember, to your point, I bet a lot of people, sorry to cut you off, the June 16th when you're watching the NBA Finals and they cut in,
yes,
I believe it was June 16th, 1994, the white Bronco chase, I think is one of the most iconic moments in American television history.
yeah, yeah. I must have been eighth grade because I was 13 years old, and I still remember. Man, I remember what happened there. I couldn't believe they went to the. I mean, it's the NBA Finals, and
I
they
know.
broke through the finals to go to and it was just a car going 40 miles an hour on the highway. The
Well,
whole
they shut
thing was
down the whole
bizarre.
interstate in LA, which is wild for anybody who's ever sat in LA traffic, for the fact that actually occurred. And, the report is, Buck, that OJ had a gun to his head in the back of the car.
Yeah.
I actually think the world would have been better off if he had shot himself in the head. Honestly.
800-282-2882 if you want to add to our OJ conversation here. The guy died, and yeah, no, we're not waiting on this one. We're speaking ill of the dead is more of a guideline than a rule. So we're laying it down here.
I will forgive anything, Buck, just about. If you never ask for forgiveness or accept responsibility for what you did, I think you should rot in hell. I don't believe you should not speak ill of the dead if the dead was ill behaved. I mean, and OJ was.
Yeah.
Welcome back in, Clay Travis, Buck Sexton show. We're reacting. We'll take some of your calls maybe here at the back half of this hour, reacting to OJ Simpson. We should also mention, because a lot of people are forgetting this, OJ went to prison. He was found civilly liable, basically bankrupted in the civil case after the criminal acquittal. He then was charged with a crime in Las Vegas for stealing his own memorabilia in sort of this weird slapstick-esque robbery, and went to prison for a few years. I'll look up exactly how long he spent in prison in what many people viewed as some sort of small measure of justice. And then obviously he got out. He had his NFL pension and basically lived in Las Vegas and played golf every day. Never paid any substantial penalty in the civil case because he didn't have that many assets. But we'll take your calls, 800 282-2882 if you want to react. Again, the news, OJ Simpson, age of 76, dying of cancer, overtook basically the entire country for about a year in 1994 and 1995, culminating in that not guilty verdict. The Bronco chase, according to Joe Concha, 100 million people watched that verdict, which was at the time, I mean, there's only like a 250 or 260 million population in the United States. So like 40% of America watched that verdict live. I bet a lot of you did as well. These days, $20 doesn't go very far, but you know what it will get you? Unlimited talk, text, plenty of 5G data from cell phone service provider Pure Talk. For just $20 a month, you'll get the same quality of service as AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile, but for half the cost. Average size family can save almost $1,000 a year, all with no contracts and no activation fees. Keep your phone and your phone number. Make the switch today. Save an additional 50% off your first month. Choose a wireless company who shares your values, refuses to advertise on the fake news networks out there, instead supports this program. Dial pound 250, say the keywords Clay and Buck to make the switch today. That's pound 250 to save a bundle. My son has a Pure Talk phone. Your family can do what mine does and save a ton. Pound 250, say the keywords Clay and Buck. That's pound 250, say Clay and Buck.